I was standing in the church lobby after the service, holding a paper cup of burnt coffee that had already gone cold in my hand. The place was loud in that polite Sunday way. Soft laughter, hymn talk, kids weaving between adults in stiff shoes. I remember watching Emma from across the room. She stood near the coat rack beside her mother, Linda, who was introducing her to a man I hadn't seen before. Old family friend, I heard Linda say. The man, mid-40s, clean haircut, confident posture, smiled like he already belonged there. Emma laughed at something he said. Not a polite laugh. Not the one she used with church acquaintances. This one was relaxed. Familiar. He stepped in closer. And then she hugged him. Not the quick, one-arm church hug. Not the kind you give someone you haven't seen since childhood. Both arms. Full contact. Her face angled up toward his shoulder. They stayed there a second too long. I didn't move. I just watched. Then Emma's eyes lifted and found mine across the lobby. Her smile didn't fade. It shut off. Like someone flipped a switch behind her face. Her arms dropped immediately. She stepped back from him. Her posture changed. Shoulders tightened. Hand went to her hair. That was the moment. Not the hug. Not the laugh. The shutdown. I felt something quiet settle in my chest. Not anger. Not jealousy. Recognition. I had just walked into a broken version of my life, and everyone else in the room already seemed to know the script. I stood there a few seconds longer than I should have, holding that cold cup of coffee, understanding that something had shifted. And whatever it wasn't small. Until that Sunday morning, everything in my life looked stable from the outside. Emma and I lived in Columbus, in a quiet subdivision where the lawns were trimmed evenly and the arguments happened behind closed doors. I managed operations for a regional supply company, steady hours, steady income. She handled administrative coordination for a nonprofit tied to the church. Our schedules aligned well enough that dinner together was still routine. We weren't dramatic people. We paid bills on time. We argued about normal things, whose turn it was to replace the air filter, whether we should refinance, whether my truck really needed new tires yet. Small disagreements with small solutions. We had a trip planned for late summer. Asheville, a rental cabin she'd bookmarked months ago. She'd been unusually specific about the view she wanted. Mountains, privacy, no neighbors within sight. I remember thinking it was thoughtful. Her mother, Linda, had never liked me. She never said it directly. She just questioned everything. My hours, my background, my long-term vision. At family dinners, she'd ask pointed questions about promotions, investments, leadership tracks, always just slightly outside the tone of curiosity. Emma would squeeze my knee under the table, a quiet signal to ignore it. Linda was deeply involved at church. Committees, fundraising, mentorship circles. Emma often helped her. That part never felt strange. It fit the picture. Mom needs help with a project. Mom's organizing a business luncheon. Mom wants me to assist with the new couples group. Most weeks Emma visited her parents too, sometimes 3 evenings. She'd say she was helping with logistics, spreadsheets, donor lists. She took what she called night accounting classes through a church-affiliated program, saying it might open doors later. I didn't question it. Trust, to me, wasn't blind. It was efficient. You either built your life assuming the person beside you meant what they said, or you lived in constant suspicion. I chose the first option. It made the days lighter. Looking back, the signs weren't dramatic. Her phone started staying face down. She'd step into the laundry room to take certain calls. She dressed slightly sharper for church events than she did for our own dinners out. Nothing inappropriate. Just intentional. I told myself it was growth. Emma had always been capable. Maybe she was finding her footing in a different circle. Maybe she was tired of being defined as my wife instead of herself. That's how I framed it. Even when she came home some nights distracted, even when conversations felt rehearsed, I attributed it to stress. The human mind is good at protecting stability. It smooths over inconsistencies because the alternative, that your foundation is shifting, costs too much energy. So I didn't push. I worked my hours. I maintained the yard. I handled our finances. I supported her schedule. When she said she had class, I believed her. When she said her mother needed help, I nodded. When she said church leadership was expanding their outreach efforts and she might take on more responsibility, I told her I was proud. Because until that hug in the church lobby, until that smile shut off like a light, nothing forced me to reevaluate the picture. It all looked intact. From the outside, we were functional. And I had no reason, at that point, to believe I was the only one still playing by those terms. After that moment in the church lobby, I didn't confront her. I didn't even mention it. I just started watching. Not obsessively. Not in a frantic way. More like I'd finally taken my hands off autopilot. When something feels off on a job site, you don't panic. You start checking measurements. The first thing I revisited was the night accounting course. Emma had mentioned it casually months earlier. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Church-affiliated extension program. I'd never seen a syllabus, never seen a textbook. That hadn't registered before. Now it did. One evening, I asked, "When's the next tuition payment due?" She paused half a second before answering. "It's already covered for the semester. Mind if I see the invoice? I'm reorganizing our expense categories." She smiled. Light, practiced. "I'll have to check my email." She never showed me anything. Then there were the rides. Emma said she carpooled occasionally to save time. But our joint bank statement didn't show rideshare charges. Not on class nights. Not on church nights. Which meant either someone else was paying, or there were no rides. I didn't accuse. I just logged dates. Every time she said class, I wrote it down. Every time she said helping mom, I noted the hours she was gone. I tracked our credit card activity quietly, matching timestamps against her explanations. Small things surfaced. She started silencing her phone instead of letting it ring. Conversations would end abruptly when I entered a room. Once, I walked into the kitchen and she flipped her screen face down so quickly it was almost mechanical. I stopped reacting to it. That was the shift. Before, I would have asked, teased, tried to lighten the tension. Now I simply absorbed it. You don't interrupt a pattern while it's revealing itself. I checked our shared cloud storage one afternoon under the pretense of organizing tax documents. There were no class-related files. No spreadsheets from church projects. Nothing recent that aligned with the time she claimed to be investing. One Thursday, she left at 6:15 p.m. for class. At 6:42, our doorbell camera pinged. Linda's car pulled into our driveway. She walked up to the porch, looked around, then left an envelope in the mailbox. No knock. No text. Just a drop. When Emma came home at 10:18 p.m., she went straight to the mailbox before coming inside. She didn't know I'd been sitting in the dark living room. I watched through the front window as she opened the envelope in her car. She read whatever was inside, sat still for a moment, then slid it into her purse. When she came inside, she smiled. Class was long. I nodded. I bet. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was heartbroken, because I was aligning data. By the end of that week, I wasn't wondering if something was wrong. I was confirming that it was consistent. And once something becomes consistent, it stops being an accident. It becomes a decision. I didn't know the full picture yet, but I knew this. Whatever version of my marriage I thought I had, it no longer matched the evidence in front of me. And from that point forward, I stopped trying to preserve it. I started preparing for it to end. I didn't confront her after the envelope. I didn't bring up the camera notification. I didn't ask why her mother was delivering sealed notes to our mailbox like we were coordinating something we couldn't say out loud. I just stopped participating the way I used to. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. The first thing I cut was the small talk. How was your day? Disappeared from my vocabulary. Not out of spite. Out of adjustment. If someone is no longer speaking honestly, questions only invite rehearsed answers. And I wasn't interested in rehearsals anymore. Emma noticed within a week. You're quiet lately, she said one evening while rinsing dishes. Is work getting to you? Work's fine, I replied. That was it. No follow-up. No reassurance. No effort to smooth the tone between us. For years, I had been the one who managed the emotional climate in our house. If tension crept in, I addressed it. If she seemed distant, I tried to close the gap. If conversations stalled, I restarted them. I stopped doing that. Silence can be revealing. Without me filling it, the house felt different. Less curated. More honest. I also stopped fixing moods that weren't mine. If she came home withdrawn, I let her stay withdrawn. If she was distracted at dinner, I ate without trying to pull her back into conversation. If she claimed exhaustion, I nodded and went to bed without offering to make tea or sit with her. Outwardly, I became calmer, more measured. There's a kind of composure that comes when you accept a likely outcome. You stop negotiating internally. You stop hoping the data will correct itself. Inside, Though, something had already shifted permanently. I wasn't trying to repair a marriage anymore. I was observing its final phase. I opened a separate checking account under my name alone. Not to hide money, just to reroute my direct deposit moving forward. Quiet precaution. Legal. Clean. I scanned copies of our financial records and stored them on a private drive. Mortgage documents. Insurance policies. Retirement statements. Nothing dramatic. Just organization. If the foundation was compromised, I needed a clear inventory of the structure. Emma's routines grew more polished during that time. She dressed more intentionally on Wednesdays and Fridays. She took longer choosing outfits for church-related events. I noticed new earrings once. A bracelet I hadn't seen before. I didn't comment. I stopped initiating physical contact. That change, more than anything, seemed to unsettle her. One night, she reached for my hand in bed. A small gesture. Habitual. I didn't pull away. I just didn't squeeze back. She withdrew her hand after a moment. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "I'm fine." And I meant it. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't raging. I wasn't fantasizing about confrontation. I had simply moved from emotional investment to strategic awareness. The hardest part wasn't anger. It was accepting that truth, when it comes, doesn't always offer something to repair. Sometimes it only offers something to endure. By the end of that month, I had already accepted something privately. Whatever Emma was doing, whoever she was aligning herself with, she had made that choice long before I noticed. My silence wasn't weakness. It was transition. And once a man transitions internally, the rest is only timing. Once I stopped reacting, the patterns became clearer. Wednesdays were labeled service work. Fridays were helping mom. The wording never changed. The tone never shifted. Predictable language, repeated consistently. When people lie long enough, they streamline it. I began marking exact departure and return times in a spreadsheet. Nothing elaborate. Just dates, hours gone, stated reason. The unfamiliar car was the next piece. A dark gray sedan I didn't recognize started appearing near Linda's house on the nights Emma claimed to be there. I drove past once under the pretense of checking on a job site nearby. The car was parked 2 houses down, engine off, windows tinted. I didn't linger. The following week, same car, same position, license plate visible this time. I wrote it down. At work, I mentioned it casually to a former coworker of mine, Daniel. He'd moved into private security contracting and occasionally handled event logistics around Columbus. Random question, I said over lunch. "You ever work conferences at the Riverside Event Center?" He nodded. "Couple times a month." "Why?" I slid the plate number across the table. "You seen this car around there?" He frowned, then pulled out his phone. "Yeah, that belongs to a guy named Ryan Caldwell. Runs church-based development seminars. Leadership stuff." My stomach didn't drop. It steadied. "Married?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "Separated, I think." "Why?" "Just connecting dots." 2 days later, he called me back. "Hey, not sure what's going on, but I've seen your wife at the Riverside Center a few times. Evening sessions. She wasn't in any accounting class." "With him?" I asked. "Yeah." I thanked him and hung up. No confrontation. No scene. Just confirmation. That same Wednesday, Emma left at 6:10 p.m. for service work. I drove 20 minutes later to the Riverside Event Center. Parked across the street. Lights were on inside the conference hall. Through the glass front, I could see small groups gathered around round tables. Emma stood near the front, talking with Ryan. Not distant. Not formal. Comfortable. He leaned in while she spoke. She touched his arm once. Quick, familiar, unguarded. No dramatic gestures. No obvious display. Just proximity that belonged to something already established. I left before the session ended. There's no benefit in watching longer once the conclusion is clear. Back home, I updated the spreadsheet. Date, time, location confirmed. Patterns stopped being suspicious. They became evidence. By that point, I wasn't trying to catch her in something impulsive. I was documenting something intentional. And the more I documented, the calmer I became. Because truth, when assembled piece by piece, removes speculation. It leaves only decision. And I was almost ready to make mine. Once I confirmed Emma wasn't attending any accounting class, the situation stopped being only about my marriage. It widened. Ryan Caldwell wasn't just a random man. He operated inside the same church ecosystem Linda had been cultivating for years. Donor networks, business mentorship groups, leadership luncheons. The kind of environment built on reputation. That's when another detail surfaced. A contractor I knew through church, Mark Jensen, pulled me aside after service one Sunday. "You and Emma doing okay?" he asked carefully. "We're fine," I said. "Why?" He hesitated. I heard something odd at the business breakfast last month." I waited. Linda introduced Emma to a few of the development guys as basically available. "Said you two were in a complicated season." The sentence landed quietly. Not explosive, just precise. I nodded once. "Who was there?" Ryan was at the table. Of course he was. That meant this wasn't an accidental emotional drift. It wasn't two people connecting privately and feeling guilty about it. It was social positioning. Emma wasn't being hidden. She was being presented. Over the next week, I made 2 more discreet calls. Nothing invasive, just clarifying. One church volunteer mentioned seeing Emma and Ryan leaving an off-site leadership dinner together. Another said they'd assumed we were separated because of how naturally Emma stood beside him during events. Not rumors. Assumptions. Assumptions based on behavior. I reviewed our finances again. No missing funds. No unusual withdrawals. Linda, however, had recently increased her donations to one of Ryan's initiatives. I cross-referenced dates. The increases aligned with Emma's increased attendance at Riverside. This wasn't a reckless affair fueled by secrecy. It was alignment. Strategic. Gradual. Socially integrated. That realization removed the last trace of personal confusion. Emma hadn't slipped. She had transitioned. And Linda hadn't opposed it. She'd facilitated it. I sat at the kitchen table that night, while Emma prepared for another Wednesday session. She chose a navy dress I'd only seen twice before. Applied makeup more deliberately than usual. Checked her reflection longer than necessary. "You'll be late?" I asked evenly. "Probably." I nodded. There's a difference between being replaced impulsively and being phased out deliberately. One hurts. The other clarifies. By then, I understood something simple. I wasn't competing. I had already been written out of the narrative. And the people involved weren't operating in shadows. They were operating in daylight, assuming I wouldn't notice the shift. What surprised me most wasn't Emma's behavior. It was how calm I felt about it. When betrayal expands beyond the personal, when it becomes coordinated, anger wastes energy. Precision doesn't. I spent that week organizing documentation into chronological order. Dates, statements, event confirmations, witness accounts. Not for revenge. Not for spectacle. For clarity. Because if this moved where I suspected it would, I intended to step forward with facts, not emotion. And facts, when delivered cleanly, don't require volume. They stand on their own. I didn't choose a dramatic setting. No restaurant. No neutral ground. No witnesses. I waited until a Thursday evening when Emma came home earlier than usual. She set her purse on the counter, kicked off her shoes, and walked into the kitchen like it was any other night. I was already seated at the table. No laptop. No television on. Just paperwork stacked neatly in front of me. She paused when she saw me. "You're home early," she said. "So are you." Something in the air felt different to her. I could see it register, the stillness. The absence of small talk. I didn't stand. I didn't gesture. I just said one sentence. "I know." That was it. 2 words. Quiet. Controlled. Her expression didn't shatter the way people imagine in movies. It tightened. Measured itself. Calculated options. "Know what?" she asked carefully. I held her eyes. "About Riverside. About Ryan. About the business breakfasts. About your mother introducing you as available." The silence after that was heavy, but not chaotic. She sat down slowly across from me. "It's not what you think," she said first. "That line always comes early." I didn't argue. I didn't counter. "I have dates," I said evenly. "I have confirmations. I've spoken to people who assumed we were already separated." Her jaw flexed. "Things have been complicated," she shifted. "Mom pressured me into some of it. Ryan, he's been supportive." Supportive. I nodded once. "When did you decide to step out of our marriage?" I asked. "I didn't step out," she insisted. "We were distant." "You were distant." "I became distant after the church lobby," I replied. "You started before that." Her composure thinned. "You're oversimplifying this." "No," I said calmly. "I'm clarifying it." She tried denial again. Then minimization. Then reframing it as emotional confusion. I let each attempt settle and pass without engagement. Finally, she exhaled. "I didn't plan for it to happen. But you continued it," I said. that ended the rotation of defenses. We sat there in quiet. No yelling, no raised voices. Just two people acknowledging that something had already ended before either of us named it. "I'll fix it," she said eventually. "I'll stop seeing him. We can work through this." I looked at her steadily. "I'm filing for divorce." The words didn't come out sharp. They came out finished. Her eyes widened slightly. Not in heartbreak. In surprise. "You're serious?" "Yes." "You're not even willing to try?" "I've been trying," I said. "You transitioned out. I'm just formalizing it." She stared at the stack of documents on the table. "You already spoke to a lawyer." "Yes." That realization unsettled her more than anything else. Not anger. Preparation. "You moved behind my back," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I moved after you did." The conversation didn't escalate. It shortened. Within 20 minutes, there was nothing left to debate. No screaming. No thrown objects. No theatrical collapse. Just logistics. She asked where she would stay. I told her she could remain in the house until paperwork was finalized. I would relocate temporarily. She tried once more. "This doesn't have to be permanent." "It already is," I said. And that was the end of it. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just precise. The grocery lists we used to argue about had lasted longer than our final conversation. And when I stood from that table, I felt something unexpected. Not victory. Relief. Because silence, once broken cleanly, doesn't echo. It settles. After that conversation, everything accelerated. Not emotionally. Structurally. I contacted my attorney the next morning and instructed him to proceed immediately. We filed before the week ended. Documentation attached. Timeline summarized. No accusations beyond what could be verified. When you move first, you control the order of operations. Emma didn't expect that. She texted twice that weekend. Not about reconciliation. About timing. "Do we have to rush this?" "Yes," I replied. Because delay favors the person still rearranging the narrative. Within 10 days, mediation dates were set. Asset inventories exchanged. I had already separated my income stream into the individual account I opened weeks earlier. All transfers were documented and legal. There was no missing money. No hidden withdrawals. Just clean division. The house, purchased primarily with my income and documented accordingly, was straightforward. Retirement accounts were clearly itemized. No surprises. Preparation neutralizes panic. Emma's tone shifted as paperwork progressed. Less defensive. More unsettled. I think she had assumed I would hesitate. That I would stall. That I would bargain for something emotional before formalizing something legal. I didn't. Linda, however, began calling. Not to apologize. To persuade. "You're making this bigger than it is," she said during one call. Emma was exploring opportunities. "You're being rigid." "I'm being precise," I answered. She tried to reframe it as spiritual growth, as personal development, as misunderstanding. I kept responses brief. "Please speak to your daughter's attorney." That ended most of the outreach. Unexpectedly, the financial outcome tilted in my favor. Because I filed first. Because I documented inconsistencies. Because I maintained records of her absence during key periods tied to financial contributions. Nothing vindictive. Just arithmetic. Emma's counsel pushed back lightly at first, then less so when presented with the timeline and event confirmations. No courtroom theatrics were necessary. The truth doesn't require volume when it's organized. By the 4th week, Emma stopped messaging altogether. No emotional appeals. No late-night reconsiderations. Silence. Which told me something important. She had likely already transitioned emotionally to wherever she intended to land. I moved into a short-term rental 15 minutes from work. Small place. Clean. Functional. No shared history attached to the walls. The first night there, I unpacked only what I needed. Clothes. Laptop. A framed photo of my father from years ago. Nothing else. Peace doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives when instability exits. Church attendance shifted too. People who once assumed Emma and Ryan were aligned began recalibrating when the divorce filing became public record. Whispers don't last long when documentation appears. Ryan never contacted me. He didn't need to. This was never about confrontation between men. It was about alignment and consequence. By the time mediation concluded, the process felt administrative. Signatures. Transfers. Deeds adjusted. Emma moved into an apartment near her mother's neighborhood. I heard that secondhand. It wasn't relevant to me anymore. What mattered was this. There had been no explosion, no public spectacle, just measured action. And when something collapses quietly, it doesn't leave debris everywhere. It leaves space. And space, if you handle it correctly, becomes stability. 6 weeks after filing, I went back to the same church. Not out of habit, out of closure. The building looked the same. Same brick exterior. Same glass doors that reflected your posture back at you before you stepped inside. People greeted me with that careful politeness reserved for someone who has recently become a subject of conversation. No one asked direct questions, but I could feel the recalibration. Emma wasn't there that morning. Neither was Linda. Ryan stood near the front after service, speaking with 2 men from the development group. He looked composed, controlled, as if nothing in his orbit had shifted. I waited until the sanctuary cleared. Not dramatically, just patiently. When the crowd thinned, I walked toward the small circle where he stood. The 2 men excused themselves when they saw me approach. Not out of fear, out of awareness. Ryan met my eyes. There was no visible hostility, just recognition. "I'm not here to argue," I said evenly. He nodded once. I assumed. I kept my voice measured, low enough that it didn't carry beyond the immediate space. My wife and her mother lied for months. I filed for divorce because I confirmed what was already being presented here as normal. His expression tightened slightly. "I didn't pursue a married woman," he replied. "I was told things were complicated." "They were," I said, "because she hadn't finalized them." Silence settled between us. No insults. No accusations thrown like weapons. Just facts. "I'm not interested in spectacle," I continued. "I'm interested in clarity." People assumed we were separated because that narrative was introduced before it was true. He exhaled through his nose. "That wasn't my wording. It was your acceptance." He didn't respond to that. I didn't need him to. "I'm not asking for apology," I said. "I'm stating that the version of events circulating here lacked sequence." He gave a slight nod. "I understand." And that was enough. Not reconciliation. Not forgiveness. Acknowledgement. Before leaving, I turned slightly toward the open lobby, where a few lingering members pretended not to be listening. My marriage ended because I chose to step out of a situation where I had already been replaced, I said clearly. Not loudly, just clearly. There was no separation in progress when alignment began. No embellishment. No detail. Just sequence. Whispers lose momentum when truth enters calmly. I didn't stay for coffee. I walked out the same glass doors where weeks earlier I'd watched Emma's smile shut off. The air outside felt colder that morning, but lighter. For months, I had gathered information quietly. Not to embarrass anyone. Not to destroy anyone. Just to avoid being erased without record. Public humiliation doesn't interest me. Public correction does. By the time I reached my truck, my phone buzzed. A short message from Mark Jensen. "Appreciate you saying it cleanly." That was all. I drove away without looking back at the building. There was nothing left inside for me. Not conflict. Not validation. Just completion. And completion, when handled without noise, leaves very little behind to argue with. It simply closes. And once closed, it doesn't reopen unless you choose it to. I had already chosen otherwise. I didn't win. There was no applause waiting on the other side of divorce papers. No sense of triumph. Just a quiet recalibration of space. I stepped out of a game where I had already been replaced. That's all. Emma chose a different alignment. Linda chose to facilitate it. Ryan chose to accept it. I chose not to remain in it. The difference is simple. I didn't react loudly. I didn't chase explanations that were already disproven by action. I gathered facts. I moved first. I closed the door without slamming it. Some nights in the rental, I sat in silence and listened to nothing but the hum of the refrigerator. No rehearsed conversations. No tension trying to hide under politeness. Just stillness. And stillness, I learned, is not emptiness. It's peace without negotiation. I don't know how their story unfolded after that. It's not mine to track. What I know is this. When someone transitions out of your life before telling you, you don't beg to be written back in. You document the exit. You make it official. And then you rest. For the first time in a long while, I slept without replaying conversations in my head. Not because it didn't matter, but because it was finished. And finished things don't follow you into the next morning. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.